You're listening to AudioMag, Magazines Canada's podcast. I'm Kylie Pohl, Manager of Member Services and Benefits at Magazines Canada, and I'm happy to share with you this special conversation between Joyce Byrne and Kim Latreille about Magazines Canada's updated Code of Reader and Advertiser Engagement. Joyce Byrne is a publisher and magazine consultant with 20 years' experience in consumer, business, trade, custom, and cultural magazines. Kim Latreille has many years' experience in directing production for some of Canada's largest magazine publishers, including Cottage Life Media and St. Joseph Media. The two are working to update the Code of Reader and Advertiser Engagement. Originally published in 2013, Magazines Canada is undergoing an update to the Code of Reader and Advertiser Engagement to better reflect the status of the magazine industry and the evolving role of technology in a magazine's brand.
Thanks, Joyce, for talking with me today. I'm really excited to discuss this important topic with you.
Thanks, Kim. I'm really happy to be here. It's great to have an opportunity to sit down and talk about what we're developing around this revised and updated Code of Reader and Advertiser Engagement for Magazines Canada.
To get us started, why don't you tell us a little about what exactly a Code of Reader and Advertiser Engagement is and what it does?
Well, the code in its current incarnation has been around since 2013. But originally, a set of guidelines was developed by the Canadian Society of Magazine Editors, and I believe that document was published in 1999. And it was intended as a guide for editors, primarily, although it's of use to everybody in the business, around the appropriate labeling of advertising within the magazine environment. So when it was brought up to date in 2013, and Magazines Canada led a task force at that time, and Patrick Walsh chaired that group, it was really bringing the original code into a more modern setting and adding more detail around some of the expanded activities that publishers were undertaking based on the input of that task force. And so now here we are 7 years later, and we've definitely seen a number of modernizations, shifts, different approaches within our industry. Publishers are taking on different kinds of activity. I think many publishers see themselves as brands, and so their editorial content is appearing in so many different channels, particularly in digital, where we have all kinds of different activities like social and newsletters and websites, that it was a really great opportunity for this group to take a look at where we might add some additional clarity, some additional guidance for editors and, like I say, other people within the business around the labeling of advertising and editorial, because the goal here really is to ensure that there's a clear distinction between the two, to ensure that there is little ambiguity in how readers are seeing that content, particularly in an age where truth in particular is of high importance to readers especially.
Yeah. And that does come into our next question. I was wondering if you could share with us why you think the guidelines are important.
Well, as I said previously, with how our industry has been evolving and how the advertising industry has been evolving as well, there's greater pressure on both sides, publishers, editors, and advertisers to come up with creative ways of delivering their message in our products. And so having guidelines on how to label that, how to handle it, it allows our publishing teams to approach those opportunities and to embrace those revenue opportunities, but as well to clearly delineate those kinds of content, whether it be branded content, so-called native advertising, or just straight on-page brand ads or advertorials within the context of our brands, in a way that our readers can still appreciate that content because it's valuable content. We know that our audiences appreciate having advertising within the editorial environment. It gives them other kinds of messages and other kinds of opportunities to learn about products and services, but that it's different from what we're doing as an editorial team.
Yeah. So in your experience as a publisher, how did you make use of the guidelines in your day-to-day running of your magazine?
Yeah, I think that the code as it is now, it underpins how our editors understand how their magazines will be paginated, how content that doesn't come from within the editorial team will be labeled within their websites. And it gives us some guidelines on if we are integrating that material, or we're integrating sponsor messages into events, or we're integrating sponsor messages into the opening sections of editorial packages. How can we approach that? And having a clear set of guidelines takes the pressure off, I think, the editorial and production teams to guess at what that might be. And to be honest, I know plenty of salespeople that use it as their own tool. When they're put upon to explain, why can't my ad go right beside that article? They have a tool themselves where they can explain. They can say, I can direct you to that part of our code of ethics, which they might refer to it as that, so that you can see, and we put it right in the masthead that we abide by the code of reader and advertiser engagement, and it really does provide a very clear way of explaining to everybody who might be involved in that process why we do things the way we why we do things the way we do, why we avoid adjacency, why we can't put your name and your advertising product on the cover of the magazine.
Yeah. So how can the magazines make use of the guidelines then?
Well, I think that the goal with this, like I say, is that the meat of the code underpins how we work in an ethical way between labeling advertising and paginating our magazines, or labeling things within the digital environment or within a social media environment. I think what people are asking for, though, beyond that, is a little bit of clarity around, what kinds of terminology makes sense. Are there best practices to use around hashtag sponsored or hashtag advertising, those kinds of things within the social media context? Because obviously not only are our editorial teams using paid media to promote our own content, but advertisers are using our channels to deliver their branded content. So we're placing advertorials, online advertorials within our social media streams. Having best practices around how to label that and how to deal with that would be incredibly valuable. It simplifies the work, and it takes I really think that then what it does is it takes that aggro and conflict out of dealing with that question, and we can focus on what the real what the real issue is, which is creating great editorial, creating a great environment for that material to appear in. And for the sales team and the publishers, it relieves the question about, can we carry this, and where should it go, and what's the best way to approach telling a sponsor or an advertiser what the material is going to look like when it appears
or even establishing the partnership with your advertiser, just sort of having a boundary around what you're able to do with them.
Yes. Yeah. And, one of the things we've talked about in the task force is these new kinds of activities that publishers are engaging in. Publishers are seeing their magazines as brands, and brands happen in lots of places, including in real life. And so when you are engaging with your audience and you're connecting sponsors to the audience in real life, that's the next evolution of this question. How does that get so-called labeled?
Right.
How will we be transparent with our audience when we deal with them in that space about who paid for what and why are we here?
Why do you think it's important for us to update these guidelines in 2020?
That's a great question. I've talked a little bit about how the industry has changed just overall, but I think particularly when you look at the digital space, our business is radically different than it was in 2013. I don't believe there was anything like the native advertising, for instance, back in 2013. And I know for sure that publishers were not utilizing social media, both to promote editorial content as well as a paid space for their advertisers to buy our audience. So and that's big and small now. I think when you look back 7 years, there might have been some bigger publishers playing in that space. Everything from small literaries all the way to the big media companies that have multiple titles are all active now in social, in newsletters, and on their websites. And so they're carrying paid media within that environment. And the best practices, as you look around the world, have definitely evolved. And so what we really want to do is provide a guide that reflects what the best media companies in Canada and beyond are doing in this space.
We hear a lot about trust in media. Do you think that magazines are in a good position to maintain readers' trust?
I do. I think I have a great respect for all kinds of media, but magazine media is one of the last places that you'll find an attention to fact-checking. We really care about unbiased, accurate reporting in our products. We're committed to getting the best information and serving our readers in the best way that we can. And we believe, and that's what the code underpins, that our audience is entitled to a space that they can trust, and advertisers, if they're renting that trust from us, are entitled to know that the audience is going to be engaged in an ongoing way, and that their trust is underpinned by a separation of editorial and advertising, and that the advertising that's included in any of those channels is selected in a way that is meaningful to the brand. Whether it's a consumer magazine delivering lifestyle information or a business magazine delivering service journalism around how to make your business better, everybody within that ecosystem it's important to have that they understand that there's an authority embedded in the way that is being delivered, and that they can trust the message that's coming from it.
Disinformation and misinformation is so prevalent. Do you think that transparency is more important than ever?
I do. I think that particularly, we're looking at 2020, the digital space, what advertisers are demanding. Advertisers are looking for ways to embed their content within media space. When it's a television show, it's a can of soda on somebody's desk that they've paid for that space. In our space, we're not doing precisely the same thing, but they are looking to run their content within and alongside. Mm-hmm. And for us to be able to guarantee that our audience will pay attention to that information, but also be able to differentiate between what is provided by an advertiser and what is developed by our editorial team, a consistency in the way that is labeled and the way that appears for our audience it's really important. When you're within the magazine itself, when you're in the print magazines, many of the same things still apply. Articles, advertorials come in and they're asked to be placed within the context of our editorial flow. We encourage our advertisers from a sales perspective, if you have a long story to tell, write it out, have it professionally written, provide it to us in an advertorial. But at the same time, we want to make sure that is properly labeled, mm-hmm. and our audience can tell the difference between the two.
Yeah. Advertising is a big part of magazine publishing, and the industry is changing. Do you see advertising evolving?
I think advertising is always evolving. Advertising agencies see themselves as a part of the creative industry, and so they are always looking at creative ways to deliver to their clients brand value, return on investment. So we're going to see pressure, or at least inquiry, around what are some of the new ways that we can deliver an audience to that brand. As a publisher, I've had a lot of questions about activations. So not only do brands want to see their campaign appearing in the traditional channel of print, the channel of digital, some of the social, but they want also to find a way to engage with our audience in person in very specific ways. So activations like in-store promos, or wine tastings at restaurants, or if you you might see if you have an event where one of your top 100 types of events that, beyond just having their sponsor presence to introduce an award or thank their guests, they might have an environment that was branded that our guests could interact with their brand. So it requires a greater level of openness to talking about those things, to creativity, to working with those brands. And then again, going back to the code, do we have something that underpins the way that we can relate together that allows us to do that in a transparent way with our audience?
Because the magazines are so much more than the print or digital rendering of the content. They're really a multi-platform brand. So how do you see the code encompass all the parts of a magazine's brand?
Well, I think that the code as it was rewritten in 2013 is excellent. And it really helps to underpin many of the ways that we work with advertisers. Where we can improve upon that for 2020 is to address some of the areas that are new to the way we work with advertising brands, or that have evolved slightly. I think that some of our approach to events may have evolved since the way we were thinking in 2013. And some of the things are just flat out, they're the same. You address things like adjacency within a magazine by, moving things around and explaining that we can't approach the pagination of the magazine in that way. But I also see that this is probably a living document in a certain way, that we may not be able to codify every approach, every single way of doing business, every single publisher's perspective. So our best approach here is to provide an updated code, some guidelines around some of the labeling for the new products, and then maybe a living resource for people that can be updated as time evolves until we find such time as the code needs to be completely updated again.
Okay, thanks very much, Joyce. It's been really great talking to you about this.
Thank you, Kim. You've been a great partner on this project, which is something, I don't know if we pointed that at the top. And it's a great opportunity to say thank you to Magazines Canada, and thank you to all of the members of the task force, because they've contributed so much to how we've evolved this plan and this code. And I look forward to wrapping it up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review AudioMag on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Follow Magazines Canada on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Mags Canada, and on LinkedIn as Magazines Canada for more magazine news and resources. Thanks for listening, and thank you again to Joyce and Kim for joining us today. A new episode of AudioMag will return on March 11th. AudioMag is a Magazines Canada podcast produced by Messenger Bag Media. We recognize the funding of the Canadian Department of Heritage through the Canada Periodical Fund.